Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fifth episode of RAG, where we talk with leading AI founders and innovators about the experiences building with AI. I'm Valeria Gomez from Pinecone. Today's guest is Nick Gomez, founder and CEO at Inkeep. In this conversation, we will chat about how Inkeep is changing the way developer-focused companies handle documentations and support. We will also break everything down and learn how they're leveraging AI to turn scattered content into a powerful search and short copilot, making sure the experience for the users are smoother and support processes are more efficient. But before we get started, we would love for you to participate in the conversation. I'm gonna kind of release a poll, so I would like to know, let me see, let's do this live. Want to kind of learn about your AI journey. Why are you in your journey of building with AI? First, are you just learning? Are you building? Are you scaling? Take a few seconds to respond. It will kind of help us understand where you are and, answer your questions as we go. Amazing. Let's give a few more seconds here. Also, feel free to share your questions and comments in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will make sure to address some of those questions towards the end of the conversation. Let's see, we have a few more. I'm gonna kind of end the poll. Let's see. So, wow, it seems like it's like very kind of scattered. 38% of you folks are just learning, kind of currently learning about AI experiences with small projects. 35% of you are building. You have AI prototypes, you have some kind of proof of concepts, and you are working on deploying your applications. And 27% of you are scaling. You're optimizing to your AI systems in productions and environments. So we have a little bit of everything. This is great. Now, Nick, finally, welcome.
Hi there.
It's really high having you here.
Yeah, super appreciate it. Thanks for hosting.
Amazing. Kind of set the stage for everybody. What about you? Just share a little bit about you, who you are, about your company, and what your team does.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nick, I'm a founder at Inkeep. A little bit of background about kind of where I come from and what made us start Inkeep. I worked at Microsoft for 3 years after college. So I worked on, in particular, like developer experiences. So a lot of thinking about onboarding experiences for developers into our technical products. So I worked in the identity space, which anyone who's ever built or added authentication to an application knows that authentication and identity is the type of thing that's like complex, but also super important, but also the type of thing where like developers don't want to spend a ton of time implementing it and understanding it, right? Like they want to get down to their business logic. So I spent a lot of time thinking about like, how do you get out of the way, but still let developers accomplish their tasks? And so this involved a lot of onboarding experiences, a lot of API design, a lot of documentation, just thinking about kind of like the holistic developer experience with our product at Microsoft. And through that experience, I also saw that it was really hard to scale support for developers. So anyone who's worked on a developer product or uses a developer product knows that any like issue that you face is very nuanced, right? Like there's it's specific to your application and to the technology stack that you're using, et cetera. And anytime you run into any issue, in order to convey your issue, oftentimes you have to like share code snippets or error logs, that type of thing. So it's very, for a developer trying to get help with their problem, it's very intensive for someone to be able to support them, right? It requires a lot of human effort. And so for companies that have these developer products and are trying to scale their support, but also still provide a really good developer experience, it has been historically really hard to do that, right? So oftentimes what you would see in the past is people would create communities, so like on Discourse or Discord or Slack, where people could kind of help each other. But that was kind of like the extent of it. It was like a way to make a community out of the support aspect of it. But it also meant that a lot of developers weren't able to get help and get unblocked as soon as they could. So at Microsoft, I saw that we had support centers all across the world, and we still were not able to keep up with all the different influx of developer questions that we were getting. And so a lot of things would still bubble up to our engineering teams or our product teams, which took a lot of time. And not everything was like novel questions, right? So the impetus around Inkeep is that teams should really be focused on being able to answer the novel questions about the product, the things that haven't been answered anywhere else before. If something has been answered or is answerable from your documentation or previous support tickets or your forums, etc., developers shouldn't have to ask a human and wait for a response to get an answer to their question. They should be able to just ask a chatbot and get a direct answer to their specific scenario. And that's our goal, and that's where we kind of came from.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your kind of journey and your background with Microsoft, kind of going through all those challenges. You know, you touched a little bit into why you decided to kind of build Inkeep, but is anything else? Like, what is like that kind of urgent story, or what that moment that you say, okay, I really need to solve for this problem at a bigger scale?
Right. So, I mean, I think it came from working in a developer product myself at Microsoft. But also at the time, we decided to, me and my co-founder had decided to do a startup together. And we had like a few ideas that we were exploring, but we kind of knew we wanted to stay in the developer products space or the technical product space because we felt it was like an underserved market. As in, most people think of companies as like either being like B2B or B2C. Dev tools as a category or developer products as a category is not that well. There's not that many products that are designed just for dev tool products. And so when we were kind of doing our early research and talking to a bunch of different folks in the space, what we realized it was something really interesting, which was in like a traditional B2B SaaS product, a high percentage of those companies have one of those little chat bubbles. So like an intercom or like a Drift or a Zendesk, et cetera. But we noticed, but with developer tools, that wasn't the case. It was like, instead of being like in the 80 to 90%, it was like maybe 20% of dev tool companies had one. And so the question was, for me, was like, why is that the case, right? And I think the intuition that I've developed over time from talking to a bunch of folks, but also just creating a product in this space, is that developers are hesitant or don't like those little chat bubbles because they associate it with like marketing and sales instead of like something that's actually like helpful, if that makes sense. And so for us, it was like, okay, how do you, there's still value there in terms of those solutions help users use a product more quickly, like implement and actually adopt and become like an activated user for a given product. What is the equivalent of that in the developer product space? And so that was kind of like the original unique insight, is like, why is there not something good in that space? Why is there not something that's like specific to technical products or developer audiences? So that was one of the big reasons why we went down this route.
That's great. And, you know, I'm a little familiar with Inkeep, to be honest. And I'm really fascinating how you guys kind of turn all kind of context, right? Content out there for like your developers into a AI-powered search and chat tool, right? That is useful to them. So what makes your product unique in the space? You mentioned that they're back in the day when you started, there were only like 20% of other kind of probably potentially companies doing something similar. So what kind of sets you guys apart?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for us is a few different things. So for one, we're not trying to be opinionated on where you author your content. We know every company has their documentation or their support content in many different places or websites or documentation stacks, et cetera. So our whole philosophy is like, hey, you don't have to worry about where you have your content. We're just going to ingest it all from any arbitrary source, basically. And so regardless of the structure of your marketing set or your documentation or your support tickets, we'll ingest all of it and we'll make use out of it. And so a big value prop for companies that we work with is like, hey, we don't have to put engineering effort into creating a solution here. Inkeep is a no-touch solution that's just able to ingest all of this content automatically, keep it up to date automatically. And then also we offer really easy to use and I think good UX experience. Basically, we offer these components that are very easy to embed. So like a search bar or a chat bubble, but also like a Slack bot or a Discord bot. So wherever you interface with your users as a company, we have like an easy way to embed Inkeep into there. So yeah, I think for us, it's like really about teams should have a high quality experience, right? So a solution that doesn't hallucinate, that is able to cite its sources, etc., but is also doesn't require maintenance in terms of setup, in terms of like, how do I ingest my content? What's the best chunking techniques? All that stuff. Like we take care of that. We do that science. And teams just focus on embedding the experience and then looking at our insights. So we're also very geared towards detecting when the bot says, I don't know, like I couldn't find information in the in your sources. And we detect that and turn that into workflows and like to-do lists for documentation teams or content teams to be able to go plug in those kind of knowledge gaps in their technical content. So we're all about like helping teams, help their users, but also turn those questions and those insights from those user conversations into actionables for their team.
And we were going to chunking strategies later on. And I know you guys use AI really in a practical way to solve all these problems that you have shared. So kind of going a little bit deeper into the product itself, what kind of techniques, algorithms, models you are using in your application?
Yeah, for sure. So we're constantly experimenting. And I'd say that anyone building a solution in-house, whether it's an AI chat support solution or our general kind of RAG solution for other domains or vertical specific use cases, my biggest suggestion is like, don't try to over-engineer it up front, rather just implement something, even if it's basic, and then see where it's falling short. And then let that drive your innovation, right? And kind of where you spend your time. And so that's been our approach from the start, which was like, we started relatively simple. And then the more customers we had, the more users we had, the more we would see edge cases where the solution wasn't holding up, right? And so it might have been like a retrieval problem where we weren't able to get the right document, or like the model hallucinated, et cetera. And so as we had all those different kind of cases early on, those became our test cases. And so we were able to experiment new techniques over time to address those. And then anytime you try a new technique, we have like this backlog of test cases that we can use to validate anything new that we try. So that's like our like high level, that's our general approach, is like help detect when things go wrong, and then use those as like test cases to make a change, and then kind of make a bigger collection of test cases over time to test different techniques on. In terms of technology stack, I think one big thing that we find that might be useful for other folks, is especially for RAG scenarios, is think about the actual content types that you're working with. So for example, with us, we often work with documentation, which is like very structured, hierarchical. Often you can represent it as like clean markdown. That's very different than, for example, like a Slack conversation. So if you've ever seen a Slack conversation, even though there's like the threading mechanism, you can reply as part of the thread, a lot of times folks don't. They just kind of continue replying in the main channel, right? And so there's not like a clear hierarchy, but also a thread is a very different format than like a documentation article. It's like a question, answer, question, answer type of dynamic. And so when you're indexing that and when you're chunking that, et cetera, like in any of those verticals, you kind of need to consider those two things differently, right? And then there's also other things. For example, documentation is higher authority, right? Like someone from the company wrote this, is maintaining it over time, even if it's not perfectly up to date. It is like the best representation from the company at the time of like the truth, right? And so when you're using all these different content types, how do you balance like authoritative content like documentation versus like a Slack thread, which can be noisier, right, or not as authoritative? And so for us, when we have all these different content types, we use different embedding techniques or different chunking techniques for these different content types. And so I think that's kind of like one general piece of kind of advice that I would have for folks. It's just like, think about your different content types and like what's the best way to index those individually and then recombine them as an output. Yeah, so I don't know, any particular part of that you wanted to dig into?
No, I think that's fine. I think we may have some questions later on, and maybe we can just kind of circle back. I know the Pinecone is part of your tech stack, and I'm always fascinated to know how companies are using Pinecone for the different kind of use cases. So maybe you can walk us through how you use Pinecone for Inkeep. You have all these type of different contexts. You talk about embedding, you talk about chunking. Where in your tech stack kind of Pinecone sits?
Yeah, absolutely. So Pinecone's super useful for us because it kind of gives us the flexibility to use a bunch of different techniques and isolate different customers as needed, et cetera. So for example, for some enterprise customers, we just kind of create our own entire instance specific to them. Sometimes if folks are using so we offer both a search and like a chat service. And so if we have a customer that's using search, then latency is really important. And so in those cases, we'll use like the pods architecture because again, latency is really important. But then when we have customers that are just a pure chat application, like an LLM application, the latency is not as critical. And so for those cases, we use like serverless, and then over time we get to move more things towards serverless because it's a lot more cost efficient. And so, yeah, in general, also Pinecone offers both. You can do hybrid search, which is like a combination of sparse and dense embeddings, and Pinecone offers those out of the box. So we're able to use those. So yeah, I think in general, like we haven't run into a wall per se, and then it's given us all the flexibility that we needed to accommodate all these different types of customers. And so, for enterprises that have thousands of pages of documentation or support centers, et cetera, we can do special things that help with the RAG system. For companies that have like a few, dozen, hundred docs pages and not that much content, it kind of lets us use a different set of techniques. And then in general, like Pinecone gives us that flexibility where we can kind of optimize for both cost and performance across these different use cases.
And you mentioned that your customers have kind of a lot of different content types. I know that breaking down that content effectively is really crucial for accurate search results, right? So I'm really curious about about your chunking strategy. Now we can kind of talk about that. Maybe how do you decide on that chunking strategy? Do you evaluate it against other methods? Any kind of lessons learned in the process? I think that's like a topic on its own. Just chunking is just, especially when you have so many different content types and content like sources too.
Right. So I think one technique that's been very helpful for us is try to match based on like a question to question. And what I mean by that is a lot of the kind of like, quick starts out there for how to build these types of solutions. They recommend kind of just breaking down by like paragraph or by like 500 characters and then considering that a chunk. For what we found is that we can still do that sometimes for like documentation, but we also focus on like trying to format things as a question. And so, for example, for a forum, a post, or like a Slack thread, et cetera, the first like part of that is a question, and the rest can be an answer. And so that's powerful because when you do a search query or someone asks a question, that is kind of you're mapping their question to like questions in the content. And so that's like one technique basically. And you can use LLMs to format things as a question as well during indexing. So you can say, hey, what might someone ask based on this piece of content, right? And so you can generate synthetic questions to match on as well. So some folks do question to question mapping. Sometimes people do like answer to answer mapping, where during runtime, when someone asks a question, they use like a very fast, dumb model to generate like a bad answer, like a hallucinated answer you wouldn't expose to your users. But then you can take that answer and try to do the vector similarity with the answer against the content. So it can kind of go both ways, and you can experiment with that. But yeah, so I'd say trying to get things aligned in terms of like how symmetric your indices are compared to your like input queries that you're doing the similarity on. And then the other part is enumeration is really important. So for example, even if you're taking a paragraph, what you should do is also add like the title of that page into your chunk. So it should be like title, subheading, paragraph, right? And then for each paragraph within that section, you do the same thing where you add the title and the subheading. And so even if you're using that way of kind of chunking, that enumeration helps give that chunk context, if you will, as to like, what is that paragraph in relation to, right? So adding kind of, you can call it metadata or like just hierarchical information as to what part is this content like this piece of content like a part of what's the bigger picture of what it's in context of, can help with retrieval as well.
And I guess like every product, right? Especially like building AI products, really you face some kind of challenges, kind of building, learning. The technology is changing so fast. Since 2023 to now, it's like unbelievable how many new models, new technology, new ways to do things. And especially with dealing, right, with something as complex as your content ingestion and retrieval. And I would like to learn your journey here. What were some of those significant challenges that Inkeep faced during the development of your product, especially around content ingestion and retrieval, and how do you overcome those?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest challenge that we saw is that everyone has very different content. Like even if everyone has docs, right? So the platforms people build docs on, there's many of them, or sometimes people just build their own super custom documentation site, right? And so everyone has very different, like the shape that their documentation takes form, or their marketing page, etc., takes form is very different. So creating like a generalized solution that's able to ingest that at like a high fidelity, high quality level, I think that was probably like the hardest part. And part of it is too is like in traditional search engines like Algolia or Elasticsearch, or kind of what those traditional search services, they put the onus on the company, the developer, to figure out what is a hierarchy of their content and then push that content through APIs to those services, right? Again, for us, the whole value prop is you as a team don't have to worry about or care about any of that. And so we wanted a smart way to ingest arbitrary content that doesn't require companies to think about indexing or like how to break down their content, et cetera. So for us, creating like a generalized algorithm that's able to navigate arbitrary websites and be able to pull out the relevant content in like a hierarchical structure that's clean and doesn't have like noise to it, so like footage, stuff like that, was like relatively complex. So yeah, for us that took a bit. The other part of that too is, and this is like a general tips for folks who care about either creating their own bot with their public content or website content, but also I think these are general best practices nowadays. So if like a third-party service like Perplexity or Google's like general search engines, how they answer questions is trying to use your content in real time to answer questions. And so some of the things that we saw there that can be helpful for scrapers, whether it's your own scraper or Inkeep scraper or Google scraper, is not doing things like, for example, this is probably the biggest problem is people using custom JavaScript to load tabs. So if you have like little code snippets on the side, which are popular in documentation platforms, oftentimes the content of like one tab won't show until you actually like click on it. And so it won't show in the HTML either, which means when you're scraping it, someone needs to actually like emulate a browser clicking on that thing in order to be able to scrape that content. You can't just do like a raw GET request and get the raw, like the content is not in the HTML, right? So you need like a synthetic browser to go navigate that. So yeah, that'd be one of my tips for folks, is like watch out for client-side JavaScript that's like hiding content that's not in the raw HTML. And then also be a little bit wary of like really huge monolithic pages where like it's a single page that has all your documentation. Those can be hard to break down as well into like something that's parsable by an LLM. So we have kind of our own mitigations and workarounds for those types of things. But those are the types of things that made being able to ingest these websites at a high quality hard.
I can just imagine. And I have another poll for our audience. I want to really know where there are the challenges. Now we talk about Nick's challenges, building with Inkeep. What about you? Share with us what are some of those biggest challenges that you're facing building with AI. And I have a few here answers, but if your answer is not here, please use the Q&A just to kind of share there. So we know some people, 24%, 32%, so the access to quality data is one of the, the biggest challenges right now. 52% model accuracy and performance, but we're kind of discussing. And 12% of them say just high cost and budget constraints. So I think, everybody's kind of facing different kind of challenges depending on the journey, right? And also like the type of AI product they're building. And industry is evolving. This industry is evolving really fast, right? And especially probably for you and Nick, developer-focused company is really at the front of all these changes, right? I would love to hear some insights on where you think things are going to move forward with Inkeep to kind of stay ahead of the curve. Any kind of trends do you see shaping the future of developer-focused companies just like Inkeep? And how are you thinking about adapting to these changes and opportunities too?
Yeah, so I think this kind of Gen AI wave, what I'm seeing is that it's kind of breaking down into a few phases. So like I'd say this first year and a half of it was, or the core bread and butter scenarios have been around search and retrieval, right? So these kind of chatbots that help you find content across a bunch of different unstructured or structured content for many different types of scenarios, right? From legal stuff to documentation sites to support forums, etc. So I think that's been kind of the first phase of it. This next phase is feeling more like action-based systems. So systems where the AI is suggesting an action and then like a human is in the loop to review that action.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I call this like workflows or action-based workflows. So I'm seeing more of that. I think this kind of correlates to the model's capabilities. So like the original models were not great. I mean, they're still honestly not great at these action-based workflows. They're good enough for people to start building compelling things, but it takes a lot of effort to get it like very well-defined. I think RAG and search, I think was like that a year ago. I think it's somewhat more straightforward now. I think there's still a lot of kind of edge cases and things for people to consider, but it's more mature now, right? So I think the RAG phase is on the mature phase. I think people are now in the process of like actually incorporating it into everyday products, everyday experiences, and that's kind of what we've been at the forefront of being able to have a high quality experience, chat or support experience. But yeah, so I think that's more on the mature side now. I think there's still plenty of opportunity for adoption, but people are implementing it basically. I think these action-based workflows are on the earlier stage where kind of like where RAG was a year ago, where it's like it's hard to do. It takes a lot of efforts and constraints and like domain-specific logic to do well. And the models are like somewhat there, but not quite there. But I think like the next generation of models will unlock those scenarios and make them really capable and be able to do that. And then, so I would expect a year from now, we're talking about those workflow-based systems like we were talking about RAG now, where it's like more mature. It's like you can actually implement it in real production scenarios, that type of thing. I do think it'll take around a year for us to get kind of like in the role for that. And then I think beyond that, it gets more into like what people are calling agents, right? So it's not just like human in the loop action-based workflows, but rather the AI agents will be able to do many different steps, not just one, kind of with some level of autonomy. Again, we're at the super early stages of that. I think that's like very early. I haven't quite seen something super compelling that's like ready for prime time there. So I think it might take like a generation and a half of models to be able to get to kind of that level of autonomy. But yeah, so that's kind of the phases that I see. RAG, action-based workflows with humans in the loop, and then full-on agents that have more autonomy. I think in terms of Inkeep, we're definitely thinking along those lines as well. So like, okay, we did RAG really well. What's next for us? So we're building on more of these action-based workflows. So for documentation teams, for support teams, where we're actually helping them basically accomplish their tasks more quickly. So for example, being able to suggest, here's a specific place in your documentation where we think there's a documentation gap, and actually enable you to go and fill that in really seamlessly. Same for like support teams, being able to summarize support threads and suggest an answer, and have the human kind of like proofread it or edit it, et cetera. So we're building out those types of workflows, action-based workflows for companies to be able to supercharge their team's productivity.
there is still a long way to go. I think we just are getting started. And one of the issues that you mentioned earlier is hallucinations. That's definitely one of the significant challenges with building, AI applications. And you mentioned that you have developed some methods to minimize that within Inkeep. Can you tell us more a little bit about that? How Inkeep is kind of minimizing hallucinations to ensure reliable answers, kind of based on all the content that your customers are using and kind of giving you.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a big part of that is your RAG solution. So models are much more likely to hallucinate if they don't have the right content to answer with. So like if the answer is in the content, then the rate of hallucination is very low. If the answer is not in the content, then it's much more likely to make it up. And actually, there's like a weird in between where it's like if it's clearly not in the content at all, the models nowadays are somewhat able to say, okay, I don't think any of this is relevant. I don't know if you prompt it correctly. Then the middle ground, which is like the most dangerous ground, where it's like there's content that looks like it could be relevant to the user's question, but it's not really what's relevant, or it's like it has a different interpretation, or it's like not the full context. And those kind of middle cases where it's most prone to try to like overinterpret the content that you're passing it. And so again, the better your RAG system is, the less you have to deal with that, because then the more likely it is to have the right content, right? So that's one component. Another component is the just like somewhat around like experimentation and prompting with the different models. So in general, you want to try to get the models to be quite conservative with the way it answers things, right? And so kind of every model behaves differently, and so you kind of have to do your own experimentation there. But there is a little bit of art to the prompting side of things, to have the models be conservative with the way they answer things. And then the last part is like being able to build up enough context about what the company does in its products, et cetera. Because it basically, if you're trying to zero shot it, which like if it has like a one-line sentence of what the company does, like if I say Pinecone is like a vector database and that's it, and then I pass in a bunch of content, it doesn't quite know how to interpret all of that content. Because it might be like something very narrow, and so it's like trying to overinterpret that narrow set of content, and it doesn't know like the full breadth of what Pinecone does and like different services, different versions, etc. So it's much more likely to like misinterpret the user's question and kind of overinterpret that narrow set of content. And so in your RAG system, if you're able to provide a little bit more diverse set of context to the model for it to understand kind of like a holistic picture of what the company does, then it can do a better job in distinguishing, oh, this is a narrow set of content. It's probably not related to the user's question, right? So there's some of that as well. So just like being able to add more diverse set of content to the model as part of your RAG system.
And you have given us so many tips and tricks and really valuable advice for everybody kind of hoping to build AI applications or scaling. We know like 38% of people are kind of scaling their AI applications. And you have a very diverse background, Nick, both in business and technology. Any other tips and tricks that you would like to give folks here joining us today about either building their own company, or building AI products? Anything around that?
Yeah, I think around startup, I don't know. I've been wanting to do a startup for like a long time. Like even as a kid in like 10th grade, I would like sell like candy at school. So I've always had kind of like I would buy it at like in my local grocery market, and then like I'd do a little margin and sell it at school and that type of thing. I got in trouble a few times because of that. But anyway, I've always had kind of like this entrepreneurial mindset. And what I've learned like in the last like year and a half, 2 years of actually doing it, right? Like going out and doing it is like I think people overestimate the amount of knowledge you need to like start it, right? Like it seems like, oh, I don't, for example, I come more from like a product and like an engineering side of things, less of like a sales and marketing side of things. Like I had never done sales or marketing. I was more like a product and an engineering and CS background. But I don't think you don't need to know it up front, I guess. Like once you do a startup, once you start the startup, by nature, it'll push you and you'll have to learn kind of these different aspects. on your own. And like it's possible. Like once you start it, like the drive to like survive, right, or like get to that next stage, will refine and like optimize your the what you're spending your time on, what you're learning, etc. So it's like a huge learning experience, by the way. Like I've learned more, I think, in the last year and a half than I had since probably like college, if probably more than that. But yeah, I think like don't be too afraid. I think the core thing, we did Y Combinator like a year and a half ago, and the core thing that they try to teach is like just focus on trying to find like a problem that people really have and develop some type of solution for it. And I think once you are able to identify like a beginning conception of this, from there on, your customers will guide you on what they want. And the market will drive you in terms of like, what is a good go-to-market and how do you do sales and marketing? What's your messaging like? How do you build a landing page? All these things, they'll start pulling you in the right direction. So I think in general, my recommendation would be just like if you feel like you understand a problem that other people aren't addressing, and it's like a real problem that you face personally or as part of your career, or other people are facing, etc. Like go out there and try to build a solution. And you don't oftentimes what we find is you can kind of do like the building and the selling at the same time. You don't need to have a full built out solution. You just need to find people who it's enough of a problem for that they're willing to take a chance on you. So like when we started, it was just me and my co-founder. We had like demos that we would spin up for people, but we didn't have like, for a while, we didn't even have like a landing page, right? And so it's still, it was a leap of faith for our customers to like take that shot on us, but they did so because like they believed in our background to be able to deliver something on here, and because it was enough of a problem or enough of a want there from them to want a good solution in that space. So yeah, that would be my general recommendation is just like find a problem where people are willing to take a bet on you, and go out and do it, and the rest will start to take care of itself.
Yeah, I think that's one of the recurring themes, like with these RAG brags. When I ask this question, is like just get started, focus on the problem that you're trying to solve, and things will come, right? Customers are gonna hopefully believe in you, gonna give you a try, and it just only takes one person to say yes to you for others to kind of follow.
Exactly.
I love that. Thank you for sharing those tips. We have some questions in the Q&A. Do we do it now? Yeah, we have some time. Let me see. Somebody is asking, is there any active adult learning you can share some details about?
Some other what? Learning?
Active adult learning you can share some details about. I don't know the name, it's an anonymous attendee, so I can ask for a follow-up question, but active adult learning you can share some details about.
Let's see, other good learnings. Oh, I think another one that was interesting for us, and there's probably a way to generalize this beyond kind of Q&A support bot scenarios, but giving models like an out. Like basically, if you're just trying to get it to say, oh, sorry, I don't know, that's harder for the models to do than, oh, sorry, I don't know, but if you need help, go to the support center, or here's a link to the Discord bot, etc. And so giving models like a kind of like more options to pick from, right? I think helps them not reason, but like have a higher likelihood chance of like choosing an option that is reasonable, versus kind of if you're trying to constrain it to just one or two things, then it might struggle with that. Yeah, that's kind of one tip that I think we've seen relatively recently.
Awesome. We have a question from Bob. He's asking, LangChain recently launched a chatbot that searches its GitHub reports and documents. It shows a lot of promise. Do you search GitHub repos and associated developer docs?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of our bread and butter, right? Like developer tool companies often have GitHub issues, as well as a lot of technical documentation. That's kind of what we've been doing since like, the early days of when we started. GitHub tends to be a really good source of content. It can be noisy as well. So like, that's what I was mentioning, where like documentate. You still need to find a way to like weigh documentation over GitHub issues, both from like a vector, like from your RAG system perspective, but also in terms of like how you frame it to the LLM, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, I think it's super like the more content you have in general, the more likely, the more coverage you have on the types of questions that your chatbot can answer. So I generally, yeah, like the more sources of content, the better. So GitHub, Docs, support tickets, Discord, forums, like any of that. Those are the types of things we ingest. But I would recommend anyone kind of look to figure out where does content about my product exist and try to incorporate that.
Awesome. Aaron Davis is asking, how do you go about testing? Are you using something like LangSmith for testing vector results?
Yeah, so we've used like a few different solutions. So one that we use is called Uptrain. Yeah, they're friends of ours, and they have a good product for monitoring things, in particular in production. I think for local testing, we just ended up kind of creating our own infra for that. So basically, we just have like a set of questions with different categories, and then we just run those programmatically as part of our development process. And so we use that kind of during development and testing. And then for production monitoring, we use Uptrain, which lets us they have their own out-of-box evaluations and kind of classifiers for different things, but we also defined around like hallucinations and other things that we care about. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty of like tools in the market. So just find something like lets you get started quickly and just go for it. And yeah, it's not that crazy. You just need a way to like programmatically run things, and then like honestly, a lot of it comes down to like you defining what's important to you. What are the performance metrics that are important to your scenarios? Oftentimes we find that the out-of-box ones are a little bit too generic, and so they might not provide the best signal for evaluating whether answers are good or bad, et cetera. You kind of have to define your own a lot of times.
Great. I think I saw something about self-solution. Actually, kind of could be this a kind of follow-up question to that, since you kind of mentioned about building your solutions. Kenga is asking, what is your approach towards on-shelf solutions versus on-home build ones in general for building a bigger application, but let's say for checking content, for example?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, so he's asking about your approach towards on-shelf solution versus on-home build ones. He's interested to learn about in general for building bigger applications, but also, for example, for chunking and content.
Right. I think what we found, maybe our situation is a little bit different than someone starting from scratch today, because we started at a time where all the frameworks were very early on in their life cycle, right? So we started like basically around the same time that like LangChain started and that Llama Index or like all the other frameworks started. And at the time, at least, we tried it, and then we like quickly ran into like limitations or like we didn't like certain abstractions that they did. And found it hard to like extend and kind of make our own, et cetera. So I would say like those types of frameworks, and maybe it's different today. Honestly, we haven't like, we don't reevaluate it every few months if we need to kind of change things up. But I would say like those, I think, tend to be good for getting started because they provide solid building blocks and like frequently used components or like abstractions, et cetera. So they just make it easy to like spin something up. We do hear often from other startups in the space or other companies in the space that they often do end up having to kind of do DIY for certain parts, if not everything, in terms of like the frameworks. But I also say like it's not that scary. Like the level of abstraction you need oftentimes is not that high. It's just like it's a lot of times it's like normal software engineering, right? And so I think you also learn a lot about the exact nuances of the underlying models, the embeddings, like all these kind of core concepts. I think you end up learning the finer details the more advanced you get and the more low level you get. So I would super encourage anyone, like if you're just trying to experiment, get started quickly, bootstrap, like if you're a startup or you're building something for your own company, like go ahead and use those frameworks. we do find oftentimes people will end up kind of evolving out of them a little bit. But yeah, maybe that changes over time too.
Great. We are almost at time, so let's do one more question, so maybe we can just address the rest of them via email, or we will figure it out. But don't worry, we will answer your question. So Masood is asking, everyone anticipate an increase in RAG-based apps and solutions. Will you said there will be an increase on demand for using vector databases?
Yeah, I think yeah, the underlying infra, right? That's why there's so much focus on the infra layer of things in terms of startups and such. Like, I've actually been a little bit surprised that in the startup space, I see more infra level companies, and sometimes it feels like I see more of them than I do application layer companies. And I think that's because this infra layer is powering not just startups building application layer stuff, but also companies themselves building internal like their own tools around things. And I think, like I said, we're still very early stage. We're like, I mentioned this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 kind of evolution of LLMs and AI. I think we're still barely in the like maturing of phase 1. And I think even for agents and action-based workflows, those will still have a RAG component. Like, all of those still have a RAG component around memory, around being able to search and do RAG across different content sets. So if anything, that's just going to continue to grow. I think we're very much still at the early stage of things.
Great. I think we are definitely at time, so we'll follow up with the questions that I have. I saved them, so don't you worry. Nick, it has been a pleasure chatting with you today, learning about your journey, about Inkeep, the amazing kind of insights you gave us today. If people want to connect with you, I know we have a lot of questions, but if they want to continue the conversation, if they want to learn about Inkeep, how do they connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of Inkeep, like our landing page is just inkeep.com. So INKEEP.com. That'll have links to our like social media, like our Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And then personally, I am Nick Gomez C on both LinkedIn and Twitter. So you can find me there. Feel free to like, we'll look at the questions that folks submitted, and I'd like to answer those. But if you have any personal questions as well, I'm always happy to be helpful for folks. So like, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, everyone. Today, we will host our next episode of RAG in 2 weeks, actually on June 25th, with the founder and CEO at Describe, Rich Tibona. And actually have the link here. Let's see if this works. I just share it there if you want to join us. Very similar format. We hope to see you there. And thank you again for joining us, and see you then. Nick, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys.